Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Well, a part of the Winged Wheel Podcast listenership is going to be happy, and another very strange part is going to be disappointed because, Evan, it's just you and I this episode. The plague has taken Brad, and he is taking this episode off.
Yep, the ones who watch or listen to the podcast in the dark are going to be very upset today.
Well, I like when the news kind of unfolds as we're prepping for the show today, and Edmonton really kind of gave us a lot to work with. What a disaster over there, but fun for us to talk about. And attached to that, the Red Wings very thankfully didn't lead us into a 2-episode with no games break with just 1 point across 2 games. They managed the win against Columbus, and they got the point against Montreal. So they helped us change the tone for this one. That would have been not great if we had to, the Reimer overtime gaffe would have been the main focus of this show.
This episode would have been so cynical and would have just dissolved into madness very quickly. So thank God the Red Wings pulled one out.
All right, folks. Well, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
And I'm Evan.
Brad Crisco, not with us. We wish him well. Some of you might not. On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we'll be reviewing Detroit's 2 games since we last spoke. Their OT loss against Montreal, which featured some interesting decision-making from the Red Wings, especially from the crease, James Reimer, and their win against Columbus. We'll be talking about individual storylines from those games, thoughts on defense, DeBrincat breaking through, Fabbri coming in with 2 goals, and lots more. Detroit in their trip to Sweden, which, they've already landed there. They're getting ready for those games, talking about what to expect for those games ahead, and more on Hockey Town as they go global. And NHL news, which is going to be a big one this episode. Edmonton lost to the San Jose Sharks, fired coach Jay Woodcroft. There's a whole kind of, narrative going around Ken Holland now. That is an ordeal as you look at what's going to happen to Connor McDavid's team. We'll see how that one unfolds and lots of thoughts. This is actually an area where Red Wings fans are pretty well versed with the Ken Holland managed team, so that's going to be a fun conversation. And then Zadorov requesting a trade and lots more before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you almost entirely by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the Dub Club, as it's called, you get access to a lot of great benefits. For example, our Patreon exclusive Discord and all the fantastic communities within that. You also get access to our overtime bonus episodes, which record right after these main ones. As Evan will attest to, they are a lot of fun, a little unhinged, but a lot of fun. You also are automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we're giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game this season, and the vast, vast majority of those are Patreon exclusive. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Evan, before we jump into it, some congratulations are in order. First of all, Red Wings beat writer for The Athletic and one of the best sports writers in the industry, good friend of the show, Max Bultman, did a thing and married up this past weekend. Allison Ferrand, his now wife, they got married on Friday in a beautiful, beautiful wedding. Allison is a phenomenal, phenomenal photographer, now shoots for Illich Companies, so you'll see a lot of her work with the Red Wings and the Tigers. Fantastic ceremony, just 2 amazing, incredible people, and we could not be happier for them. So our congratulations to Max and Allison on getting married. Also, the Larkins expecting a baby in the spring. Big news.
The spring, eh? That's coach won't be happy about that. That's right in the prime of the playoff push. I don't know.
That's, you know what? Dad energy, though, we've seen it time and time again. New dad goes out, scores 2 goals in the next game.
That is true.
Yes.
Hopefully we're playing another playoff level team, and those points are actually worth 4.
Yeah, so congratulations to the Larkins. All the best to them moving forward. Okay, let's jump into it, and let's start with a little bit of an unfortunate game. And I'm laughing because the game was equal parts frustrating and then just ridiculous at the end. But Detroit started off the first of their 2 most previous games since our last episode against the Montreal Canadiens, and it was a eventual 3-2 loss. They went down to Montreal. Both teams had not scored first, and it seemed like a million years. Detroit lost that battle and continued their lack of scoring first streak as Montreal went up 1-0. Christian Fischer tied it. Puck deflected off of him. There was a lengthy review, but he tied it off a Rasmussen shot in the second period. JT Compher again tied the game for Detroit as he had a really, really great shot, actually, from the left side. And, Detroit, again, came from behind twice, tied it. And in overtime, there was just a really stupid decision.
The Decision by James Reimer.
You know what? James Reimer, we talked a few episodes ago about how his technique in net seems a little unorthodox. And we said it doesn't seem that great, his footwork and his lateral movement in net, but he's been making the stops. By the numbers and by performance, he's been the better of Detroit's two goaltenders, Alex Lyon obviously not factoring into the net. Husso's been getting more of the time, so it's going to be skewed, but we were like, this is making us a bit nervous. But again, just 2 goals against Montreal is what it is. He didn't sink the game for Detroit at that point, but he made this decision in overtime to basically fall on Cole Caufield's stick and hold it. And time froze, and the referee looked at him, and he looked at the referee, and the referee does what any pro-level hockey referee is meant to do, which is to say, hey, bud, are you going to let go of the stick? I'm going to give you a beat here. Nothing. He's like, come on. Are you going to let go of the stick? Reimer? Frozen there. No. And the ref goes, all right, hand in the air, penalty called, 4-on-3 in overtime. And because hockey is poetic, and because justice is poetic, who else but Cole Caufield rips it past James Reimer clean to win the game for Montreal?
I had a tough time believing that Cole Caufield would have been able to come back and influence the 2-on-1 the Red Wings had going the other way. I mean, everybody saw this. I don't know how much we need to regurgitate the thoughts on the play. Obviously, it was a bad decision. Maybe he thought, the refs missed a blatant throwing the stick call. Maybe I can get away with this one.
That's right.
So he was maybe just rolling the dice, thinking that the NHL refereeing sticks to precedence at all, which, as everybody else knows, that's not the truth. Yeah, not a great look. And typically when you give a team a power play in overtime, there's a lot of room out there, and Montreal is one of the best shooters in the league in Cole Caufield, and he made them pay pretty quickly on that.
It was, the Reimer decision was bad. And that was, obviously, from your goaltender, preventable penalty, just really stupid, and then he got beat. That's a very easy, it's very easy to lay blame on James Reimer. And you have to, as a Red Wings fan. You see, he made a mistake, he got beat after. He has to eat that one. That is what it is. But I think there's a larger thing here to talk about, which is the Red Wings have an avoidable penalty problem. The Red Wings have a penalty box problem. By the numbers, they're not the worst in the league. I think they hover around between 5 and 10 in terms of, penalty minutes taken or penalties taken. They're in and around that range. So they can definitely have improvement. But if you watch the game, I'm pointing to the eye test here, watch how many of those penalties are necessary or just part of the game, and how many of them are just boneheaded penalties. And we've seen it across the board. It's not just the Red Wings depth players. It's not just their best players. It's not just their goalies. We've seen it from Reimer to cost a game. We've seen it from Larkins in the box a ton. We've seen it from Rasmussen in the offensive zone. Just a bunch of, you don't even want to call it undisciplined. It's not even that people are out there pissed off wanting to punch someone in the face. A lot of the times it's just a stupid, pointless decision. There's no merit to it in terms of the competition, and there's no merit to it in terms of a guy getting revenge against someone like Brad Marchand. They just are taking dumb penalties. Yeah, and I remember early in the season, David Perron took one in the middle of the ice too. He was pressuring someone. I can't even remember the game, but he did this weird 180, and he ended up tripping someone when it was just totally unnecessary. And yeah, the penalties you take, like the Reimer one, where the penalty he's taking isn't going to really influence the play, or, the offensive zone penalties that this team is taking where, they're kind of away from the play, or they're just a bad hooking penalty. You're 200 feet from your net. You don't have to be taking those penalties. So
I mean, what does that boil down to for me? It's really an execution thing. Players are, in the wrong spot, so they're trying to catch up to the play, and they just make a bad decision. I think for me, it kind of all boils back down to the team is not up. Before last game against Columbus, the team was not up to play at the start of games. And when you're always playing catch up, you can't always get in a nice groove and execute fluidly. So I don't know. It's got to stop. And I'm sure the coaching staff it makes their skin crawl every time they take one of these boneheaded penalties that are not near the play or 200 feet from the net. It drives fans crazy too. It's just so unnecessary, especially a team that focuses on team defense. You're not out on an island by yourself. You don't have to be taking penalties like this.
And after the Montreal game, another thing that I said, and I think I tweeted this out too, is Detroit got to 2-2. Like, they got the Fischer, deflection. They got the Compher goal to tie it, and who knows, maybe one Reimer, take a breath, don't make a dumb decision away, and they got a good bounce and they win in overtime. We know how 3-on-3 overtime is. But overall, Detroit didn't look good that game. I think the drop has been too precipitous between their overperforming 6-game win stretch or whatever it was. And we said that that's not sustainable over the course of the season. They're not going to score 5 goals a game all year, but they can be really good, to how they've been playing recently. And I'm talking after the Montreal game, like, they just looked uninspired. I think this is a team that's gotten a little bit stale. We talked about the preventable mistakes. We talked about the inconsistent play, the uninspired offense. They just look stagnant. They look a beat behind. And it just seems like when they have the personnel to do it, they just need a shakeup. And maybe this Sweden trip is going to be it. I know they scored more in the Columbus game. We'll talk about that in a second. But a lot of their best players, even like DeBrincat, scored in the Columbus game, but he was slumping. We talked about that last episode. Larkin's very obviously not playing 100%. Seider, we were talking before the episode, Evan, like, he's putting up the points, but anyone who's watching Red Wings hockey right now knows how much better Mo Seider can be. Him and Walman, when they perform well, are at like the top level of pairings in the NHL. And especially for the last little while, it's been like a comedy of errors. Someone loses their footing and lets a puck skip over their blade, and then, falls going backwards or misses an assignment and just looks lost. Too much of that lately, and the whole team kind of looks discombobulated. Anyhow, that was after the Montreal game. It wasn't feeling good, but you're looking at this team and saying, they have what they need to win. They just need to focus on the execution. And it goes back to what I've said probably enough times to make the listeners' ears bleed, which is, it's really hard to be a good team. Like, you can have the personnel and you can do good things, but to do it consistently, it's not dissimilar to golf, actually. Like, you can hit really good golf shots. I'm speaking your language here, Evan.
Oh, okay.
But doing it over, 4 days in a tournament or even over 18 holes, it's exceptionally hard to do, and that's what sets out the great from the good. And in the NHL, you can have really good players, but to do this over an 82-game season on average most nights, it's tough.
Like Edmonton.
A little bit of a preview for later.
Yeah, it's really tough, especially, I think maybe the start of the season for the Red Wings, at least from a fan perspective, maybe it gave people false aspirations to maybe what this team is. Obviously, I'm not going to be upset about such a strong start. That was probably the most fun Red Wings hockey we've had maybe since we started the podcast. I don't know. I can't remember a few weeks ago, so 7 years ago. Good luck.
What did you have for breakfast?
Nothing. Coffee.
Oh, nice. You're very European of you.
Yeah, I'm a blue collar guy, looking at car batteries these days.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Tough morning for the guy.
I finally had some dirt on my hands. I don't know if the start of the season really gave people false expectations, or, it's, I'm never going to fault someone for being excited and like being happy that a team is doing well, but, has this team maybe regressed back to where people think they should belong? I would say yes. But it still doesn't answer the incomplete play, the very inconsistent play. Yeah, I still struggle to figure out what this team is. But there's some very glaring things right now with this team. The top line being very cold. I mean, last game against Columbus, which we'll talk about, you saw signs of life. Yeah, maybe it was the start of the season just really gave people the wrong idea of how the season was going to go. I don't know.
Well, like you mentioned, the start of the Columbus game was much better. Detroit finally started on time, and they started first, which was unique. Lucas Raymond with a really, really clever goal, skilled goal, recognized the kind of space that the defense and the goalie was giving him, was going behind the net from the left side. If you're, watching on, you're facing the net from the blue line, going in from the left side, recognized that the goalie was cheating to the other side of the net early, and the defenseman wasn't really covering the inside post, and Raymond stopped, came back, tucked it right back in. It was a really kind of magician-like play. You almost want to say the kind of thing that you'd see Pavel Datsyuk do routinely. And Lucas Raymond made that look easy. It was a very, very cool goal. And credit to Lucas Raymond. We talk about Detroit's best players slumping and DeBrincat and Larkin going a little bit between points and performances. Raymond, I think, has been the most consistently good top Red Wings player in that stretch. So good for him to open scoring like that. And that was a much-needed boost for Detroit. Robby Fabbri got on board right after, which, again, he came back after missing everything but the first game. And that was, tough. His first game back wasn't the best. He was in the slot. Fischer found him right in the right spot. Fabbri, when he's healthy, does put himself in the right spot a lot and scored that goal, which was the 2-0 lead for Detroit that early on was good. Did go away by the end of the first period. Texier scored, and then Fantilli. In there was one of those comedy of errors I talked about from Seider and Walman. Someone blows a tire and the break going the other way against Detroit's best pair, and they just make him look like Detroit's third pair. And then another goal where Jeff Petry gets beat in such a way where you're like, he's just not doing it for Detroit and for the amount of minutes he's getting because Detroit's best players aren't performing. That's when I put out there, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. It's not like Detroit is icing 6 or 7 defensemen who are all doing really great and just holding down the fort and at least putting out league average defense. Even Detroit's best defensemen right now, in Seider and Walman, oftentimes are looking like Swiss cheese. Plain and simple. They're just getting beat too easily. So in my mind, even if he's not perfect, even if he's still turnover prone or will make defensive mistakes or whatever it might be, get Simon Edvinsson up here. Because I would rather watch Simon Edvinsson make the same mistake as Jeff Petry or anyone else, because ostensibly he can learn from that and develop. Is the NHL a development league? No. But we've seen the position of defense benefit from NHL reps and experience time after time after time. So if this is what you're getting from the guys who are supposed to be experienced and holding down the fort until Edvinsson's ready and they're not doing any better, get Edvinsson up here. Run 11-7. Don't sit anyone out if you don't want to. Just make the cycling in just one guy in the press box. I don't care. But this defense doesn't look good. And the goaltending isn't bailing them out.
We always said, there'll be an injury. It's just a matter of time. And somehow the Red Wings defensive core has remained intact so far this entire season.
The only thing they haven't done is get hurt.
I know.
In such a way where they have to call up Edvinsson. And that's not a bad thing. We're not wishing for any injury, but it's it's funny how that all kind of comes together, and that's the one thing that doesn't, check the box.
I think that was our main sort of solace in the fact that Edvinsson didn't make the team was, injuries happen. He'll be the first guy to come up. It will be a matter of time. It's a matter of when, not if. But somehow this defensive core has stayed healthy, but to take one of Brad's lines, I'd rather watch a guy we know might be bad versus a guy who is bad. Listen, Jeff Petry's a great guy. Obviously, his family means a lot to Detroit and the state of Michigan. It's not a personal thing at all. It could be anybody. You know what? I don't care if it's Jeff Petry. It could be anybody. I think Simon Edvinsson deserves to be in this lineup. Maybe at the start of the season during training camp where we said, they're all established NHL defensemen. It's going to be very hard for him to break that. For me at this point, it doesn't matter. You got to start getting some developmental reps at the NHL level. And we've seen the NHL get younger and younger and younger. You have to just let those guys try and break through on their own.
Speaking of breaking through, and speaking of Jeff Petry, actually, this is a part of his game where I do give him credit because it does, with the right opportunity, come through from time to time. He recognized a puck in the corner where he could activate into the play, came down to the right wall and found Alex DeBrincat in the slot, who fired it home and broke his little cold streak there. And that was an important goal for DeBrincat to score. In a game where Detroit needed to score 5 because Husso wasn't good and the defense wasn't good, I think Detroit needed to outscore them. So Petry found DeBrincat, who scored his 10th of the season in the slot. And then a turnover turned into Kostin finding Daniel Sprong, who made no mistake beating the goalie on the right side. And Detroit, again, had a 2-goal lead. Jake Walman made that 5-3 game as a Walman shot found its way through, ricocheted, and all of a sudden, I think that was initially credited to Robby Fabbri, but Jake Walman ended up with the actual goal there. And then it was a 5-4 game at the end with Patrik Laine showing off his Patrik Laine shot, but Detroit did end up hanging on 5-4. So was it a pretty game? No, I don't think it was a pretty win, but it was an important win because Detroit went from potentially getting 1 of 4 points to 3 of 4 points heading into a break before the Sweden trip. You know, they outscored their problems, which, again, there's a bigger thing to talk about here. Goaltending's been meh at best, and defense has been meh at best. But that's, you talked about, Evan, is this just where the team is at, and is this about their level? I think the 3 of 4 points against the Montreal and Columbus level teams is about where Detroit's playing right now.
Honestly, other than it being Montreal and being another team in the division, and those points being worth more, you know, you're not upset about that. Like, recent versions of the Red Wings, 3 of 4 points, very, very good. It's, you know, a win's a win.
Yeah.
In the NHL, and 2 points is 2 points, but I'm sure the coaching staff would like to clean that up quite a bit, limit those defensive mistakes. But hey, you know, the team finally started on time and had 2 goals basically in the first 6 minutes. You know, it's great to see that sort of change in the team sort of mojo coming out of warm-ups. The
only real saving grace for Detroit through all of this, and it's a double-edged sword, is the rest of the Atlantic is just kind of...
They're eating glue.
Yeah, Ottawa's doing something, but Ottawa's not like league worst. They don't have 5 points like the Sharks. They still have 12 points, and they're 8th in the division. Buffalo is 15 points, Tampa's 16, Montreal's 16, Toronto's 18, Detroit's 18. So
you're 3 points from second last in the division at this point. It's the middle is tight.
Yes, the middle is essentially the whole division. It's really just Boston with 5 points of separation over Florida with 19 in second. And outside of that, it's in a week and a half, Ottawa could be in a divisional seat and Detroit could be back at the bottom. Montreal could fall to where we think they're going to fall, or they could be second in the division.
The Sweden game is going to be huge.
It's going to be massive. I'm happy for the Swedish crowd, actually. That's going to be awesome for them to see consequential Atlantic Division games.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's the position Detroit has left them in. So, yeah, the win streak early on, you bank some points while other teams are still figuring it out. And, you know, 3 of 4 when you're playing poorly is good. You're still playing hockey, but you'll take 3 of 4. Like you said, a win's a win. But this isn't going to last forever, and it's too tight to keep.
Hockey last year or 2-3 years ago, this team would be absolutely half the points of what they have now.
Yeah, we'll take meh hockey, but we also, someone asked me, they're like, you know, do you just have to be happy with this because it's a little bit better at least, even when it's bad? And I'll say, I think you should be satisfied that they're at least a little bit better, but never will I tell a Red Wings fan, hey, lower your expectations and don't expect more from this team because, you know.
How many teams are satisfied with the performance of their team in the NHL? Boston, Rangers, Vegas. That's 3. So 29 other teams.
Vancouver's
are still
thrilled, but yeah.
Vancouver. So other team, almost every other team in the league is likely unsatisfied with where they are.
In one way or another.
In one way or another, whether it be their total aspect or just facets of the game. It's a process, and it's the most hockey sportsman statement of all time. But if you're not one of the true elite, like top 3-4 teams in the league, you're always trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
The top teams are just trying to stay tuned up and get themselves ready for the playoffs. Everybody else is trying to figure out and establish themselves and what kind of team they are.
And that's okay that Detroit's, you know, doing this, because it's going to happen no matter what. When you have as much personnel turnover as they have, you have as much, honestly, holes in the lineup as they still have. It's cool when you can score 5 goals a game for a stretch, but you have to expect the inverse.
Yeah.
And goalies are voodoo. They always will be. And until Detroit has a bona fide perennial number 1 goalie that comes through, They're going to have to figure it out. And frankly, they have 3 goaltenders capable of winning hockey games right now. We've said it before, but it seems like they have to bring 3 goalies on the Sweden trip. So Lyon isn't going to do a potential conditioning stint until after that. If that's the route they still want to go, every indication seems that that's likely, but that could change in a dime. Anything could happen, an injury could happen, and he could have to come in. But if they send Lyon down for a conditioning stint, that only buys them so much time. They're eventually going to have to get Lyon in. And based on, the Reimer overtime mess up and Husso looking pretty below average this season, I would like to see Lyon get in.
It might actually spark the other 2 guys to pick their game up because they know another guy's now getting some minutes and he's taking minutes directly from them because of their play.
And they know he can do it because he's the one who got Florida to the playoffs last year.
He could very well get a couple starts and he becomes the starter of this team if he plays exceptionally well. It's going to be extremely unlikely and extremely difficult for Alex Lyon to do that because he hasn't played in, the whole season.
Since Nam, pretty much.
Yeah. So, is that a likely scenario? No, but I think the Red Wings would be mistaken if they didn't at least try that experiment.
And in terms of the lineup shakeup that I was talking about, we talked about Edvinsson and getting him those pro reps, and that's really important. I think for his game and for the defense overall, I would love to see that. I really want to emphasize that. He could come up and be bad. He can come up and be Detroit's 6th best defenseman, and Petry could outplay him most nights. I think there's a pretty good probability of that. But like we've said before, and we'll repeat right now, I think you just have to see what you have in him as of now and work on the development as you go because he has offensive ability. He's working on getting things to NHL speed. If it's so atrocious, just send him back down. That's fine. But in my mind, you're not getting what you need from the defense, and things look off. The what really signals me is when your best players are playing poorly most nights, things are looking off.
Mm-hmm.
If Mo Seider in a contract year looks like he's overthinking things and just a little bit too in his own head and playing way worse defensively with decision making than we've seen him play, and in terms of his chemistry with Jake Walman than we've seen them play together. That shows you that the execution, like you said, Evan, is off and just something's not there, but they can be a lot better. And it's such a mental sport on an individual player-by-player basis and on a team basis. You just need a shakeup. Bring up Berggren. Is he absolutely tearing up the AHL? No, but he's being Jonathan Berggren, and we know what he can do. Bring him up. He might inject something into the lineup, and if he doesn't, great, goes back down, whatever. But there's, eligibility rules in there and what have you. But still, we'll see how the Sweden trip goes, but in my mind, this team could use an injection of something different.
Yeah, I agree. And, people will say, oh, well, where is Edvinsson going to be put in the lineup? It's like, I don't care.
Wherever.
You got a top pairing defensive unit, and then you got everybody else. If you want to put him with Mata to just stabilize the back end a little bit, that's fine. I don't care. You want to put him with Justin Hall, who I've actually thought has been decent this year. He's been a lot better than advertised. Put him with him. I don't care. Simon Edvinsson will find his way because he's got the tool set, and I totally believe he's got the confidence to figure it out at the NHL level.
A few more points on defense. First of all, Gostisbehere was benched initially. He didn't have a good performance in the game against New York, and so was benched against Montreal. And Lalonde said he's been good overall this season, but just wasn't sharp. I personally saw that and went, ugh.
What about everybody else?
Yeah, the best I can come up with was, we know your older brother gets away with this shit all the time, but we expect better from you. And it's just one of and that honestly is fair because you do expect better from Gostisbehere. There is advantage to watching the game from above. Not the decision I would have made, but when I talk about getting a shakeup into the team, benching an important player is actually one way to do it. It sounds counterintuitive, but think back to when Filip Hronek, before his kind of breakout year, which he was promptly traded in, he had a couple benchings where he would just look terrible. And it did wake him up to a degree. I didn't disagree with that decision from Blashill at the time at all. Ben Sherratt has been way better than last season, and relative to his peers, absolutely not the problem at all.
May I say, Ben Sherratt might be the most steady defenseman for the Detroit Red Wings.
It's like, for all the railing against Ben Sherratt that's happened in the past, we'd be remiss in not saying, like, it does sound crazy when you have Mo Seider and Jake Walman playing to the level that you knew they could play closer to the start of the season. And yeah, Ben Sherratt is absolutely Detroit's most steady defenseman right now, or at least he's out there and you're not so concerned like you are with Petry or, whatever other defensive gaffe is going to happen. Credit to him. He deserves it.
Yeah, there's still, moments where I'm like, how is that person behind the net, Ben Sherratt, in the offensive zone? But hey, you know what? I like defense who activate and kind of play as a rover. You see some of the best goal scorers a la Quinn Hughes.
Yeah. They
love to play that little rover where they activate and really throw off the defensive systems and who guys are covering. I like that a lot. So, we were exceptionally hard on Ben Sherratt last year. I think everybody was, but I think this year, what we're looking from Ben Sherratt, I think he's played to that level.
He's been what we want him to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Two guys who are doing really well in depth roles, Klim Kostin and Christian Fischer. Really like their game right now.
Yeah, Klim has been excellent in the lineup. He brings, a slightly different look than basically what any other line does. He's not afraid to get in people's face. He's got actually half decent hands.
He's got silky hands, man.
He can toe drag, and he's got a little bit of finish. So, that is exactly the type of guy you want in the bottom half of your lineup. And Fischer's a bit of a water bug out there. Like, he is a real prick to play against. So, you need guys like that. And, are you going to get goals from them regularly? Absolutely not. But you need lines in the NHL where nothing happens.
Yeah, 100%. And Fischer, he doesn't do it the same way as Klim, really. Klim, he can do it the talent way. He can do it the grind way. Christian Fischer is basically just you asked a coach to create a fourth line player within reason in his image and just grinds, gets to the right areas, works hard on the puck and does the right things. It sounds like meaningless platitudes, but look at the Robby Fabbri goal, for example.
Yeah.
You can understand why Arizona was upset to lose Fischer, and you can understand why Edmonton was upset to lose Klim Kostin.
Yeah, I think they've actually been, quite helpful. Bottom of the lineup guys are not ultra impactful, and they don't totally push the needle to you being a contender, but you do need guys like that in the lineup to give you a different look, because not every single line can be, 20 goal scorers, guys playing on the power play. You need the meat and potatoes guys.
Yeah. I've now cursed them.
Yes, yep.
Well, Detroit is going to be playing those two games in Sweden, but they don't happen until Thursday and Friday, November 16th and 17th, both at 2 p.m. Eastern for reference. So we're going to actually have...
My God, I'll be awake for those.
That's right, yeah. That's going to be great. You're not going to have to watch games on replay like the West Coast games.
Yeah, I'll just be tucking myself into bed right by the time that game ends at 5:30 or so.
Yeah, of me and Brad, you are the crustiest old man for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Although your commitment...
As soon as I started paying property tax, that's when I became just the biggest old man of all time.
So we'll have one more episode before those games, but we'll have something interesting to bring you, hopefully to fill the air. Stay tuned on that. Okay, that's a lot of Red Wings talk. Let's get into the rest of the NHL here. And by that, I mean the Edmonton Oilers. What a team this is.
We're a team.
They could hardly say that prior. They are, as we record right now, 3-9-1 for 7 points. They had the win against Seattle last night, which was an important win, or so they thought. But in the end, it didn't matter because they actually lost to the San Jose Sharks. We talked last episode about how San Jose beat Philly and then set up a showdown with Edmonton where they could both be level on points if San Jose won, and that's what happened.
The last minute of that game in San Jose sounded like a series clinching playoff game.
That might be the most watched San Jose Sharks game this season.
Oh, 100%.
And it very much was like people tuning in to watch a car crash. Like they knew it was going to happen and they wanted to see the carnage.
Yeah, I don't think the NHL fan base has been so galvanized quite like that game on Thursday night.
And it's not like people hate Connor McDavid or they hate the Edmonton Oilers like people hate Toronto or Boston or anything. It's just, it is kind of this remarkable thing in a horrific way that a team with the most talented player to ever play the sport of hockey and Leon Draisaitl, who right now is among one of the best players on the planet, is at the bottom of the NHL, like literally playing league worst hockey. A lot of that's dictated by the fact that they couldn't get a save from Jack Campbell, who's now been waived and sent down to the AHL, or Stuart Skinner. They have to make a move in net, but yeah, they that car crash has been happening all season, and that loss ultimately is what led to the firing of Jay Woodcroft. Even though they won against Seattle, it wasn't enough, and they made the move to fire head coach Jay Woodcroft, and it was, I don't know. We'll talk a little bit in a second about why we understand the decision, but to me, I feel for Woodcroft here because this seems you get some average goaltending, and he has his job right now.
Yeah, what's the saying? If you show me a good goalie, I'll show you a good coach. Yeah,
and then the inverse is also very true. Like, it's tough because so much of it was out of his control. There was a lot in there about, defensive system that he was trying to implement that just wasn't taking with the Oilers, and he's not blameless on that front. I think at the end of the day, you can't put your team in a position at the start of the season where they have to win at like a 105-point pace to even sniff the playoffs when you're meant to be a cup contender. So I understand Jay Woodcroft being fired. What's tough here is the Ken Holland situation, and you don't have to look far for Edmonton fans to be screaming about that. Jeff Jackson is coming in and running that team and hockey ops from above, but Ken Holland is still the general manager. It's an open secret. It's talked about everywhere. We actually reported it on this show. Funny enough, our Ken Holland sources didn't go away. He just left the Red Wings, and so it wasn't as advantageous for us to have Ken Holland sources. But we said last year we believe that this season is Ken Holland's last season as general manager, and lots of folks have said the same thing. And he has a reputation, right? Like, he is, like it or not, among the living legends of hockey management right now. He'll go into the Hall pretty quick after he retires. He's well regarded around the league. And really, if Edmonton wanted to fire Ken Holland, it wouldn't accomplish anything different than just having Jeff Jackson run the day-to-day or making the big decisions regardless. I'm not saying that's necessarily the situation right now, but I'd probably bet that they're moving in that direction, if not having already done that. So it's kind of crummy for Jay Woodcroft, but it's almost like Edmonton was locked into this.
Yeah, it's, when a team's underperforming, typically the order is the coach goes first, and then the GM has nowhere to hide after that if the team doesn't turn it around. But if they feel that Ken Holland isn't the one really making the decisions anymore, and he's more so a figurehead than anything, then you keep him. I don't know. It's tough to. You can give people advice or say what you would do, but we're so far removed from being involved in those situations. It's entirely difficult to have any sort of sense on what's going on in there. But for Ken Holland, the guy who was the most patient person of all time and let Mike Babcock run amok forever in Detroit.
Yeah,
he's had three coaches in the 4 years he's been GM there.
Yeah, since May of 2019, he's hired 3 coaches.
Yeah. When he became the general manager of Edmonton, they needed a number 1 D and they needed a number 1 goalie. 4 years later, they need a number 1 D and a number 1 goalie. So, patience is a virtue, and Ken Holland has that in spades, but clearly he's grasping at straws, trying to figure out what the hell to do with this Edmonton Oilers team.
Yeah, this is Jackson's team now. Like, Ken Holland's on the way out. I'm sure he would have loved for things to have gone differently, but there was rumors of Edmonton making a big move, maybe with Montreal. We saw Primo win against Detroit. Are they going to try to make a trade there? Nothing materialized yet. We talked last episode is one of Detroit's 3 NHL-level goaltenders part of the solution there. I don't know.
Edmonton's got to shed caps. Like, it's got to be a dollars in, dollars out trade, and nobody's really interested in picking up one of their goalies or picking up one of their rostered players. They want their picks, but you got to move a player off the roster. So Edmonton's in a brutal spot to try and make a move.
They have hired a new coach who will be familiar with Connor McDavid because he was his coach with the Erie Otters in the OHL, where Connor McDavid played. So did Alex DeBrincat. Other notable players as well. Kris Knoblauch, which I hope I'm saying that correctly, and that's not going to be a problem for me to look up because I'm sure we're going to be hearing his name plenty in the coming weeks. And Paul Coffey, who was previously a special advisor to owner Daryl Cates, steps in as assistant coach as well. So Woodcroft and the assistant with him, Dave Manson, are out, and Knoblauch and Coffey are in. Knoblauch came in from Hartford in the AHL. Had a lot of success in the O. The A is a little bit of a different beast, but really well-regarded coach. Rangers fans are a little bit annoyed that he's gone from their system. I think what Edmonton chooses to do, Evan, like you're talking about, where they have to pretty much give up assets to make a move here, and is that worth it? It's going to be dictated by how Edmonton plays with this new coach. We've seen a new coach really inspire teams to do well right away. It's almost like clockwork. But Connor McDavid is also very obviously playing hurt right now. He is not playing 150-point hockey right now.
And that's really the crux of it all, right? Like, how do you get McDavid to not play and actually rest up and heal? Where you also need Connor McDavid in the lineup to right the ship and get this thing back on track. Like,
it's brutal out there. And you know what? Winter's coming too, so it's going to be cold soon.
They don't have really any. They need everyone else to right the ship, and they can't rely so heavily on their top two players, which
is how their team is constructed. So if you're the GM right now, do you give up the assets and the picks necessary to offload the kind of let's say you're moving Campbell out or the equivalent contract?
You're going to have to give up a mountain to get rid of Jack Campbell.
First plus.
Oh, absolutely. You know,
it's a big plus too.
Just to move him, not even talking about who you're getting in return, is going to be a monumental lift.
Teams are going to be asking for the kinds of things that's going to make, you know, Jeff Jackson and Ken Holland hang up the phone. Like, that's how much they're going to be asking.
Oh, yeah. And nobody's crying for the Edmonton Oilers to make the playoffs. No. Especially teams who might have been on the bubble in the Pacific. They're laughing. This is great. I don't think you're moving Jack Campbell. The cost is too high. You got to look at moving Skinner, for example. Maybe he's the move. I don't know what you do. You trying to fix goaltending in Edmonton is almost a fool's opportunity because it's impossible.
It's a hard task to do, period. How long have we been watching Detroit try to do it? The best goaltending that Detroit has had over the stretch of an entire season isn't Ville Husso last year. It's Jonathan Bernier when he was playing, you know, with Jimmy Howard or whoever else.
Yeah.
And he got injured because they overworked him, and then that kind of faded away, and he obviously left. They didn't bring him back because they didn't want to spend as much, whatever. But Jonathan Bernier was Detroit's best solution in net since Jimmy Howard was in his prime. It is exceptionally difficult to find NHL-level goaltending, which is why when you go out and spend on guys who don't have the kind of pedigree and longevity for 5-year terms, like Ken Holland did with Jack Campbell, that's tough. I have no problem paying goalies a decent chunk of change short term, but unless you're signing like Connor Hellebuck or, you know, Vasilevsky or Sorokin or Shesterkin, some of that caliber, to commit that much term to goalies is one hell of a, you know, big cojones swing, because your coaching staff is hung by that anchor if it sinks. And eventually you as the GM are hung by that anchor if it sinks. And that's what we're watching right now in Edmonton.
Yeah, name me. Yeah, this is a classic Ken Holland bad contract in the salary cap era. Darnell Nurse was a bad one as well. Like, these are the contracts you got to avoid if you're going to be a contender. And, you know, teams have shown, like the Vegas Golden Knights, they ran through 6-7 goalies last year, and they were still able to win. I don't know. Edmonton's in a disaster, and, you know, you can talk about moving guys in and out, but for me, it's, you know, do you make these moves to try and salvage the season, or do you make no moves and just say, oh, we'll start again next year, or do you make the moves just to keep Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl as part of your organization?
I think the last one is the answer, Evan.
To me, it is.
It has to be.
Who cares about this season? Who cares about who you got to trade? Because at the end of the day, if they lose one or both of those guys, Edmonton is going to burn.
There have been a lot of memes going around about, you know, Connor, LeBron, James, McDavid, because LeBron has dictated the coaching and management everywhere he's been.
Sidney Crosby demanded Chris Kunitz to be on the Canadian Olympic team. You got to do those things.
You can have a decision on like a 59-41 decision in terms of what's favorable, what's not. Like you mentioned, your first two options, Evan, like, do you punt to next season or do you try to make this one work?
I don't even think you think about, but now that I'm thinking about it, you don't even think about results based. It's keeping those guys here.
Exactly. That is so, it is 100% these generational talents that I have on my team. How do I guarantee that they're here in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 years?
And they'll say win. So it's like, okay, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. But there's more of an involved process now in the modern NHL. Like their agents are involved.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It is way more integrated. Like the tentacles run deeper. And I'm not saying Connor McDavid's pulling the strings and he's like, walking in and pushing Jeff Jackson and Ken Holland around. No, but there's a very real aspect to keeping this player satisfied. They get paid. Connor McDavid's next contract is going to be such a gross amount of money relative to what we've seen in hockey. It'll be as much as like a bench player in the NBA, but I digress. That's a whole different argument. But he's going to make such an insane amount of money. But at the end of the day, he wants to win. This guy's as good as he is because he is sick in the head about winning. He came back way too early to his own detriment because he cannot bear not being on the ice to help his team win, especially when they were losing. You have to, unfortunate though it is at some points, because it's like 2 steps backwards to go 1.5 steps forwards. You have to keep him satisfied in that regard.
I 100% agree. I think, part of being a general manager or a president of hockey ops is being a great people manager. And those are the 2 guys you got to keep in that organization above all else, because with them there, every single year you have a chance of winning.
It's going to be tough to see.
I don't know what they can do, and it'll be interesting to see how the season plays out for them.
I could do this whole thing is just another, and there's examples from the Red Wings too, so I'm not just trying to dunk on other teams, but I'm going to do a whole episode one day on the importance of pro scouting. We focus so much on amateur scouting because that's the topic du jour while you're a rebuilding team. But for pro scouting, how many times has pro scouting sunk teams? Like contracts that should never been handed out because pro scouting, it's not an afterthought, but it's just too many bad decisions go for too long, and these pro scouting groups stay as they are for too long. Like Ken Holland notoriously is a great negotiator with restricted free agents while he has team control, and with UFAs just overspends going back more than a decade. How many Abdelkader, Eriksson, Helm, the kind of contracts where it's like death by 1,000 cuts, and some of them are also massive gashes too.
Yeah.
And then does the same thing in Edmonton multiple times. Like pro scouting teams need to have more pressure on them. Like they need that part of the league. Like if you have a good pro scouting team, you have such a massive leg up. It feels like it doesn't get enough focus. And I honestly think need to have more control over some general managers who have terrible habits like Ken Holland.
There's very few guys that they have injected into that lineup via trades that have been effective as members of that team. Zach Hyman might be the only one I can really think of off the top of my head. Ekholm was a flash in a pan last season. He looked like he'd really kind of solidified the back end, but that's clearly come apart. Yeah, every guy they thought they were getting, they didn't.
I don't know, man. That team has got... You just hate as a hockey fan to watch the best player on the planet wallow at the bottom of the league. So they got to figure it out. I don't care. I hate it. I can't stand it.
Doesn't bother. I don't cry for any team. I'm not saying I love seeing that, but you know what? They made their own bed. They got to lay in it.
Anyhow, we'll see what happens there. Elsewhere in Alberta, Nikita Zadorov wants a trade. He wants out of Calgary. And for a big defenseman who logs minutes and hits like he does, he is going to get interest. Whether or not he is actually as good as he's going to get the return for is one thing. I personally love the way he plays. I know he's not, like, on paper the best defenseman, but you just love watching those hits. It's electric.
Yeah, speaking of meat and potato lunch pail kind of guy, he's that guy. And I thought for sure Edmonton we switched teams. Calgary would try and lock him down as in being part of the future, whether that's continuing to do whatever they're doing or in a rebuild, because he says all the right things in interviews. He's not afraid to speak his mind in a way to try and charge up the team. I was kind of surprised that they wouldn't just kind of pay him what he wants to keep him there. There's going to be teams who are tripping and falling over this guy, and whether that ends up being the right or wrong decision, that comes back to the pro scouting conversation we were just having. Yeah. Because, do I like Nikita Zadorov as a player? Yeah, he does. He plays those hard minutes in a hard style of game. Do you need a Nikita Zadorov to win hockey games? I'm not totally convinced of that.
Brad Treliving probably is. You've seen the links between Toronto and Zadorov, and Brad Treliving obviously knows him from his time in Calgary, and that's been talked about even before the season started. Toronto's one of those teams doing God knows what in the Atlantic right now. Like, they're just not playing good hockey night to night. They essentially have to rely on, a couple key guys to outscore their issues. If that sounds familiar. Craig Conroy has a big task ahead of him. He could really do well here. It's tough if you're looking at Calgary saying, oh yeah, reset when you're in the first year of a $1 billion year contract with Jonathan Huberdeau and a bunch of other guys.
And you got a new arena coming.
Yeah, that's a different story, but they could do some damage in terms of the return for Zadorov. This is probably the peak of his value. And Toronto, where their toughness in the Ryan Reaves experiment has been
an absolute failure.
Like, one of the worst players I think Toronto has had in their modern era on the ice is Ryan Reaves. By the eye test, by the numbers, just absolutely useless in terms of what they brought him in for on a 3-year contract. So terrible. But
yeah, that one makes you scratch your head.
Anyhow, we'll see if the Toronto link is there. This year's storylines have been everyone has lost their damn minds and is acting so weird.
There's just a few teams are vibing.
Yeah.
Just maybe 6 teams are just vibing right now. Colorado is about to get bag skated until they die. So I'm not even sure I believe that they're vibing.
Vancouver, man.
Vancouver's vibing.
Maybe I'm a hater, but I'm convinced that's coming down.
It's like fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, won't get fooled again. You have to believe Vancouver is gonna come back to regress to the mean, but all their players are having great seasons.
It's hard to knock them. Okay, we are going to actually move this conversation into overtime, which is again brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to join the Dub Club. The bonus episodes, the Discord, the tickets to the Red Wings games, and lots more are some of your benefits. You allow us to grow the show. Grow the content into other shows like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashanth Iyer and Sean Shapiro. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation, host Winged Wheel Podcast Nights at the LCA, and lots more. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Let's take some questions from our patrons. Joseph Barry says, if you were Detroit and you saw some young potential players struggling in their current systems like Holtz and Kent Johnson, do you consider trying to acquire one of them? It's not going to be surprising, but my answer for this is almost always yes, not universally. Some players you watch and you're like, that's a busted player. Like, we held out hope for Zadina for a long time, but if an outside team was watching him in the last year or so, they'd be like, no, I'm not giving up.
Everyone did their homework for once.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are their coveted drafted players. The teams don't really usually want, unless you're at Vegas, you don't usually give up on your first round picks too soon. I mean, you do your due diligence and you make some phone calls, but it's probably would be expensive to acquire those guys because I don't think those teams are going to give up on them quite that soon.
If they are, like if a team wants to be stupid, I would love to take advantage of a Kent Johnson acquisition. Or let's say the start of the season went different. I would love to have gotten Alexis Lafreniere on the cheap. Is it going to work out guaranteed? No. It would be a massive shock if they then turned into like a first overall pick level player in Alexis Lafreniere, but you can see talent in players, and sometimes you see, all right, the system and the opportunity that they had wasn't for them. And you do have to demonstrate a little bit of a bend, not break in terms of what you allow and the leeway you offer, because, you expect better from your guys, but if you're pulling a guy who needs just a little bit of breathing space to see what you have in him, that's the kind of thing you have to be willing to do as an organization. I will say that doesn't scream Detroit to me.
No, me neither.
So I wouldn't bank on it. Moritz Seider says, I didn't really watch the Columbus game, but I'd heard that Mo had been downgraded to power play 2 with Petry slotting up. With that said, how are we feeling about Lalonde in this point in his tenure? Cheers, boys. So the question about Lalonde in my mind is a lot about, what we talked about earlier in this episode, Evan, which is execution. We have seen this team in lower lows than this. Way worse lows than this.
Oh, yeah.
God-awful hockey. And after that, they played the kind of hockey that almost got them into the playoffs last year. And that's something that I really liked about Derek Lalonde. We actually talked about that a lot with him off air after our interview with him, which was, the process of getting the team back to that level, et cetera. But It's going to feel weird considering like you harp on the execution so much, but I'm not concerned because we've seen not only the team do it, but Newsy get the team out of this funk. And so that's what I'm looking for to happen next. And that's not a short-term thing. That's kind of a medium-term thing over the course of a season.
Yeah, and the power play has been goalless in the last 2 games, so it's just a different look. Like maybe Seider's gonna gel better with the guys on the second unit. Maybe there's a look that they're trying to find and establish with that. And maybe, moving Petry onto that power play, maybe they find something there. It's all about, providing different looks, because the teams are playing. I've all watched tape on the Red Wings power play. You got to continue to improvise and make adjustments. So, 1 game sample size, I'm not too worried about it at all. I actually would prefer that they make changes if the power play has been as anemic as it's been.
Jonathan Melwish says, after some concerning mistakes against the Blue Jackets, is it time for just a few games to split up Walman and Seider to try 2 different top 2 pairs on D, or am I being overly harsh? I have no problem splitting them up for a period of time to see. Like, even if you don't find something, like Evan said, just shake it up. Yeah,
and I think similar calls were coming for the top line to be shooken up before last game. You know what? When you're not one of the best teams in the league, I think everything should be on the table. You could see something in practice that kind of ignites something. I don't think anything should ever be off the table for a team like the Red Wings.
Yeah, you said this a moment ago, but you are constantly making adjustments. This isn't a 16 or 17 game season like the NFL. Like 82 games is a lot. There's not a single thing that's going to work night in and night out unless you're a healthy Connor McDavid.
The only team that hasn't changed their power play in 15 years is the Washington Capitals.
Yeah, pretty much.
Everybody else has to be making adjustments, providing different looks, because teams watch tape and they're like, all right, this is how we neutralize this set play or this type of structure. Like, you always have to be making changes.
A spade who doesn't appreciate being called a spade. I like when they pick up on things that we say repeatedly and just...
That sounds like something I said.
No, I think I've been doing the spade a spade a lot. I've also been saying I digress a lot. Someone's taking a shot every time I say it, so this episode is in their memory. They say, fun thought exercise. You're able to nullify one player contract in the league, and that player couldn't re-sign with the same team. Which do you choose? A superstar that you hope will sign with the Wings, a key player on arrival to sabotage them, one of our bad contracts, etc. I have what I think is the right answer to this.
I'm doing Steven Stamkos to see if he'll actually go to Edmonton and see if Ken Holland is really full of shit.
Mine is hitting on all those points. A player on a rival team, a superstar who might sign with Detroit, Tim Stützle.
What? He might sign with Detroit?
He's got the German connection with Mo.
Oh, yeah, so that would absolutely be his number 1 pick.
Well, I don't know. Like, is it guaranteed? No, but...
He could go to Edmonton.
It's not in the Atlantic anymore, and it's not a team that's supposed to be in... If you take Tim Stützle off the Ottawa Senators, I'm sorry, that removes them from the conversation of being ahead of Detroit in the rebuilding process.
For sure.
So that's a double whammy. And
that was just not the one I was expecting.
What did you think I was going to say? Like Austin Matthews?
Not that.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Tim Stützle... Like, Brady Tkachuk's one thing. Yeah, of course. If you take him off Ottawa, he'll just go to Florida, and that's the Atlantic still screwed for Detroit. But you take Tim Stützle away, in my mind, that's Ottawa's most important player going into the future.
Yeah. Okay. I'll allow it.
Okay. Hockeytown Racing Academy says, do McDavid and or Draisaitl end this season not in Edmonton?
No.
I'm not there. No. I don't think we're... Like, that's a big move to make if you do it.
I don't... It's hard enough to trade players, and the NHL or GMs aren't good enough at making creative trades like that. I feel like a move like that is like a few tiers above the nuclear option.
Yeah, that's like they're going to do like a 30 for 30 on how that trade developed one day big.
And unless those two guys do not like each other, I think removing one prematurely spells the end for the other.
That is there's 2 pieces holding up the Jenga tower.
Yeah.
And by all rights, those guys, like, those are 2. What I really love about those players, and the reason I've never like, oh, another team loses their stars, great for everyone else in the league. Like, those 2 guys are absolute dogs. Like, they are competitive to the nth degree. Like, they are some of the most passionate players in the league, in sports, about winning. Connor McDavid, you can see it. Like, for what he lacks in personality and media, he makes up for in passion just about winning hockey games.
Yeah.
Leon Draisaitl does vent a little bit by being pissy with the media, which I think is really funny.
Yeah.
And honestly, a breath of fresh air. Not that it's like, oh, every question is stupid. I think a lot of times reporters have to ask stupid questions to get good answers like that. So it's a little bit of tic-tac there. But they're both just such entertaining guys in terms of the passion they bring to winning. A lot of other sports, you see players cash out. And I'm sorry, like that's one thing that kills me about the NBA is like the amount of, it might be the smart thing to do, but game management that's done and they sit and rest, and
it's a poor fan experience when those things happen.
It's a much more individually driven sport, so it is actually probably a better gambit for winning later on in the playoffs when it matters, but that's something I appreciate about hockey. Is it like caveman mentality, a little bit silly, a little bit like Neanderthalic? Sure, but that's the spirit of hockey that I love. Like the best player who's going to get paid the most in the league still gives the most damn about winning that game.
Yep.
It's stupid right now because Connor McDavid's playing hurt and can't really help Edmonton as much as he wants to. But
damn it, he's trying. Well, I think he's trying.
Connor McDavid is two consistencies in this world, in the hockey world. Alex Ovechkin on the left side on the power play, or in some kind of office because he does float over time, and Connor McDavid trying.
Yeah.
All right, that's my soapbox for this episode. Let's wrap up this version of the Winged Wheel podcast so that we can end the Bradless experience for those who are passionate about that. I'd like to thank all of you so much for tuning in. If you're a new listener, we are a man short today, so there's usually one more voice in here, but we appreciate you tuning into the show, and welcome to the Winged Wheel podcast. If you're a listener of old, thank you so much for tuning in with us. It means the world. To all of you who support us on Patreon, we could not do this without you. And for those who want to, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support in other ways, wherever you listen to your show, Spotify, Apple, wherever, leave us a rating. It makes a big difference. And hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're on, and tell a friend about the show. We'd like to thank all of our name-level supporters on Patreon. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Raymond's Missing Tooth, Icon, Brad's Lord and Savior Bradley Cleveland, Ryan's Grunge CD Collection. That's a little callback to our overtime episodes. Seider the Ass Kicker, Ryan's Grunge CD Collection. Oh, did they do something? Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutinen and Aluski, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Coyote Season Tickets in Anywhere But Tempe, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, D-Town Westside, Exquisitine Buble Schwinslow, Give Blood Fight Probert, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, Kalen Wood, King Tone, literally one of the players we mentioned in this episode, Marcus, Marlon Winchester, Matt K. Cannon Fodder of the Cheesebag Army, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Never Go Full Kyle, R.A., Red 3, Ryan Hubbard, Scott Martin, Scree and Lube, That's What I Appreciates About You, Brian Vasha, Walman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, Adam Rose, Andrew Broderick, Axel Sandy Palika, Big Cheese, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leightonen, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, D-Boss Snip Show, Dungeon Master of Puppets, Frank Stanley, Ferk Houston, NHL to Portland Baby, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Interrupting You to Ask, Huh? James Laporte, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Adobo, JM Rhapsody, John Evans Derogatory, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Linda Hull, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Norris Seider, Ophelia, Steven, the Hodag, the Mexinadian, the Hat 123, Winging It in San Diego, X, formerly AA Ron, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll be back with you Wednesday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.